Welcome back to the office. Okay, let's continue from our previous video. Here's the thing. The order of this book might seem questionable. And the reason why I say that is because we don't get to credibility, likability of the speaker, the source of the persuasive message until now. And the fact of the matter is that in the elaboration likelihood model, for example, you are more likely to attempt to elaborate on a thought in your brain, to seek out more information about a persuasive message if you like the person who gave you the message versus if you don't. So these chapters on authority, charisma, likability, be it social or physical attractiveness, all of those things still apply and sort of will impact the previous models that we've talked about already. So credibility and charisma are two things that are incredibly difficult they're easy to define, but they're difficult to teach someone to have. It's very difficult. I could tell you until the end of the world how to establish credibility, and I still won't be able to do it to make you be able to do it. I still can't give you the credibility, right? There's no way to give it to you. You have to have it. Sometimes you have to earn it. Sometimes you have to establish it. But let's start with where the book starts, which is with authority. And it's always bothersome to me when they talk about persuasion and they mention Hitler. That's just okay. I find Hitler incredibly non-persuasive, but I'm also watching him from the 21st century in black and white in a language I don't understand. He just sounds angry to me. But to others, he was incredibly authoritative and demanded he didn't demand it, but his voice demanded to be heard. He was someone who repeated the message over and over and over and over and over and over again. When you repeat something like that, according to Aristotle and others, when you repeat something like that, people are more likely to learn. They're more likely to remember. And so repetition is a part of persuasion. How you do that repetition sort of is impacted by your level of authority and charisma. They say in the book that authority is a distant cousin of credibility. And I'd like to say, okay, maybe a distant cousin, but we're talking like fourth or fifth down the line here because authority as a speaker is demanded, it's commanded, and oftentimes seems more like coercion to me than anything else. To speak with authority used to be a compliment because what they meant was you were speaking with a good amount of credibility behind you. You were speaking authoritatively. You spoke as if you knew what you were talking about. Those are all good things. Unfortunately, to say that that person speaks with authority implies some external authority that is applied to them, has less to do with how they're speaking or who they are or how they established that authority, has a lot more to do with an external authority that is given to them, a demand that you must listen. For example, your principal when you were in school, your professors. Most of the time, you have to listen to us, right? Because if you want to pass a class, you kind of need to know what we want you to do. And you hope that the professor is telling you what you need to know to do well in the class, right? That is the goal. The goal is not for professors to give out as many failing grades as possible. The goal is to teach you something. And in order to do that, we repeat. We tell you to do exercises that are repeating the things we've already repeated, we ask you to give it back to us in the form of tests or papers or oral presentations, right? But we are given an authority outside of all of that, which is to say that, if you want a degree, that you have to listen to what we say, right? And do what we say. To me, that's less about credibility than it is about authority. Now, the thing is that there are people who have authority given to them, and they lack the credibility to, teach what they're going to teach or persuade you in any way. Let me give you some examples. The President of the United States, whoever it is, I don't always agree with that president. They're not always necessarily credible to me, but they do always speak with authority because we give that to them by voting in a president. So any leader like that has an external authority that requires that we listen, because if we don't listen, we might be in trouble, right? Whereas someone who has authority and is charismatic, I don't know, Zelensky right now is winning, I think, that competition. Your book mentions Barack Obama. I would also argue that the speech to the G6, I think, in Canada, why can't I think of that guy's name? His father was the prime minister for a long time, too. The prime minister of Canada, the incredibly good-looking one, that guy, speaks with an external authority, but he also has a certain charisma about him. All right, so let's talk about what we mean by these terms. We'll start with charisma because, and honestly, I don't know how to give you a good definition of charisma. The book gives you a couple, run with that, because I don't have a different or better way of talking about charisma. What is charisma? We know it when we see it, but that's about all, right? It's hard to say, here's how I'm going to become charismatic. It's more like you're a charismatic leader, or that person. Here's an example for you. For fun, my friend and I have been watching a psychic medium online named Matt Frazier, and not for any real reason except I'm trying to figure out what his sort of communication style is that makes people believe that he is talking to their dead loved ones. And I'll be honest with you, he's very good. I think I might have mentioned him before, but he is very good at sort of getting me to say, okay, maybe he is talking to that dead person. It seems a little nuts. There's a lot of detail there. So my friend Jeannie, who's a psychologist, she and I got together and we were watching it, and she's going, no, you could have guessed that one. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, think about this. And she sort of follows it from the psychological perspective, whereas I follow it from the communicative perspective. But one thing we both agree on is the reason he's so successful is because he is so charismatic. There is no way to watch this guy and not be just mesmerized. And in some ways, why? That's the question. Why? What makes that charismatic? And so if you know who I'm talking about, if you've ever watched him, great. If you haven't, you can go on YouTube and type in Matt Frazier, Fraser, and find a video and watch it and see if you see what I'm about to talk about, which is, let's start with, he's physically attractive in some ways, okay? He's got perfect white teeth, very bright. He dresses, I guess we would say, snazzy. Not always sure that it's the best look. He likes a lot of flamboyant clothing. His proposal to his now wife was over the top. His wedding was over the top. A lot of things about him are seemingly just simply over the top. He knows what gestures to use to make people want to respond to him. And he knows the cadence. He knows when to pause. He knows how to keep people interested. And you throw on top of that a bunch of enthusiasm, and suddenly you've got this combination of charisma. You've got an extremely charismatic speaker. As your book mentions, there have been a lot of charismatic speakers. Jim Jones. Oh, our good friend, Charlie Manson. Charles. Chuck. We've got, you know what? Here's the thing. And they mentioned Hitler too. Here's my problem with this. Jim Jones convinced a bunch of people to kill themselves. First of all, he convinced them all to move to Guyana. Why the heck would I move to a jungle? My brain is just scrambled whenever I read the story of Jim Jones. And if you don't know who Jim Jones is, he was the one who got, a lot of people, I don't remember the number, to drink, they were calling it Kool-Aid, it definitely wasn't, but drink the Kool-Aid, to believe him when he said that they had to kill themselves. And the people who refused to drink got shot. There are pictures of piles of dead bodies, and I just keep thinking to myself, there is no way anyone would convince me to drink poison if I had any physical ability to stop it. Yet all of these people did. How? I didn't find him charismatic. I found him dull and depressing and sad. But again, perhaps that's because I'm a 21st century looking back at, what was it, the 1960s. It was before I was born, I believe, 1970s maybe. So it's a little bit disturbing to me that people think that's charismatic. David Koresh, I'm more likely to know more about because he was in the, I believe, late 80s, early 90s, and I was definitely aware of what was going on in Waco, Texas, the Branch Davidians, if you've ever heard of those. He apparently convinced a bunch of people to also be willing to kill themselves. Now, granted, there's some question as to whether or not all those people knew they were going to die. Did the FBI really have to do what they did? I honestly don't know. But I do know that he managed to convince a bunch of people to give up their wives, to give up their children to him. It's scary, right? Charisma can be used for negative things. Another one your book mentions is, I can't remember his name, but it was the people who believed that they were catching a spaceship to go to heaven or something like that. And they all wore the same tennis shoes and all drank Kool-Aid that killed them. Again, we refer to these as cults, okay? And the reason we refer to them as cults is because there is a charismatic leader who manages to get a bunch of people, I mean a lot of people, to do what they tell them to do. And they have no external authority except that which the audience has given them. They may not even have an education or a plan of action or anything. They're just so charismatic that we want to do what they tell us to do. I have questioned this a lot in my life because I like to think that I have a lot of free will, I guess. Or maybe that I think that I'm stronger than most. I'm not really sure. I did get, brought into selling Mary Kay. So maybe I'm not as resistant as I thought I could be. It's actually not that bad. The point is that I know people who sell Scentsy. I know people who do Tupperware. I know people who are in these multi-level marketing programs. And to me, those are sort of cultish too. In order to be truly successful in those, you have to be incredibly charismatic. They call it persuasive, but I promise you, it's just charisma. And what kind of distinction am I making there? Your book makes some. I'm making the distinction that if I'm persuaded to do something, I'm persuaded by a good argument, by reasoning. If I'm persuaded by charisma, I'm persuaded just because I want to please the person, whoever that is. So those are all the negative connotations of charisma. And normally when we talk about charisma, we're talking about it in terms of leaders of cults, leaders of movements, leaders of countries, etc. Okay, so there's almost always some sort of leadership style involved in that. And the charismatic leader is the one who can talk to anyone, who can recruit anyone, who can get anyone to do almost anything. Now, charismatic leaders aren't successful 100% of the time. They don't have to be considered charismatic. Just a large group. When is charisma good? This ethical question about charisma is the same question we ask about persuasion, about rhetoric, all the time, which is it ethical to use charisma to persuade people? Well, that depends on what you're trying to persuade them to do. If it's to drink Kool-Aid and die, that's probably not very ethical. If it's to fight for the rights of an oppressed people, then maybe that's okay, right? If the end goal justifies the means, then that makes it okay, because charisma is just a quality that people have that can be used for good or evil. Persuasion is something we do that can be used for good or for evil. Charisma and persuasion in of themselves are not inherently good or bad. They are utilized for good and for bad. But when we talk about charisma, a lot of times we're referring to the good. We're referring to, oh man, your book annoyed me with one small thing. I have to tell you this. I was reading through the chapter about charisma, and they were mentioning all these people that were charismatic. And they mentioned John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, President Obama, Malcolm X, President Clinton, I forget who else, but let me just say, they were all men. As if somehow female leaders don't have charisma? That is a bunch of crap. I mean, there are female leaders out there, women out there, who are incredibly charismatic and who get people to follow them for reasons that we can't always understand. The good news is I can't think of one example of a charismatic speaker or leader who is a woman, identifies as a female, and spoke for evil, used it for evil intent. I can't think of any LGBTQA member or person who has used it for evil. None of them. I can't think of any of them. But I can name many, many men who identify as males who have, in fact, used it for evil, as I just did, right, for the past 20 minutes. So charisma, it's a tool, it seems like. Can it be taught? Well, according to Cicero, we can use grand gestures, right, like televangelists. We can use grand gestures. We can use loud voices. We can use a rhythmic cadence. Whenever we talk about like that rhythmic cadence, I always think of Martin Luther King Jr., of John F. Kennedy, of Barack Obama. But there was a cadence to Hillary Clinton. There is definitely charisma in Michelle Obama. There is charisma in a lot of female leaders, women leaders. And I'd like to just acknowledge that so that I don't think you're reading the book and just getting, sort of one tracked here. There are also all kinds of leaders who are charismatic. I'm not just talking about presidents and world leaders. I'm talking about, leaders that are in churches, leaders that are in our government or political order, if you will, who lead social movements, who inspire us to want to get together to form groups and to do something. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which I don't know is a thing still, is something that was started by a woman who lost her son in a drunk driving accident. He wasn't drunk driving, the person who killed him was. And so that began Mothers Against Drunk Driving. We had Rock Against Drunk Driving that came long after MAD. That was called RAD, and that was excellent. And there were a lot of female singers. I think the one I'm remembering right now is Joan Jett, Lita Ford, and a few others that were doing commercials and speaking out for Rock Against Drunk Driving. So we're not just talking about like leadership in a very formal sense. We're talking about charismatic behavior that persuades others to want to listen to you. Now, let's be clear. I have no charisma, right? I'm terrible at it. But you know who's really good at it? And not for the purpose of necessarily persuading you or leading you somewhere, but for the purpose of keeping your attention. Comedians, stand-up comedians have a great deal of charisma. That's why we listen to them. We find them funny. We find them interesting. Some of us find them intelligent. I have a real affinity for John Oliver. He's probably my favorite. I have a real affinity for Jon Stewart. I happen to like both of them. But I also loved Phil Hartman, who's been dead a long time. I'm trying to think, Norm Macdonald. I mean, people who didn't have any political or cult or any other type of agenda. They were just trying to be funny. Bob Saget. These people have charisma. People like them because they had charisma. And so charisma is the answer to everything, it seems, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're saying, who you're saying it to, how well reasoned it is, as long as you have charisma. But that's not entirely true. There are plenty of people who have a level of charisma that make us nervous. Hitler is probably my biggest one. And again, of course, 21st century, looking back on World War II. How did he convince anybody to do anything? I don't know. But to them, he did. So how do we define charisma then? And how do I teach you how to have it? Well, that's not my goal. My goal is not to teach you charisma. My goal is to teach you to recognize it, right? The goal of this course is to get you to recognize that and to understand that if charisma is followed up by a well-reasoned argument, then persuasion is more likely than not. And that's how we get into the question then of believability. As I said, you can't just have charisma, you have to have credibility as well. So let's talk about credibility. And they break credibility up. Aristotle breaks credibility up into two things. Credibility is made up of, competence and, I've just forgotten this C word. Is another C word? Character. Thank you. It took me a second. Character and and competence. And what he means by that is who you are as a person and how well you know the topic that you're speaking on, how well reasoned it is. Well, your book talks about it in terms of credibility being made up of social attractiveness and of not intelligence. It just literally says credibility. And look, here's the thing. They're not wrong. I think they basically mean the same thing as Aristotle. When we talk about social attractiveness, we're talking about how much we want to listen to that person. Okay? If someone gets up to speak and I don't think they're a good person, I don't think they have goodwill towards the audience, I don't think that they give a damn about what's going to happen to me, they're not going to be someone I listen to. I'm going to say they have zero credibility with me because they are zero socially attractive to me. They don't give me anything, right? And you can have some physically attractive people who are that way. I can't really think of one right now, but there have been physically attractive people who couldn't persuade a mouse to eat cheese. I mean, just nothing. And you have to have more than just one of these qualities. That's why not just charisma will work. Well, much the same in credibility, character and competence both count. Social attractiveness includes obviously some physical attractiveness. That's a given. The power that they may have if they have a position of authority. Whether or not they're a good person, whether or not they're a nice person, whether or not they have a track record of being good. Okay. My favorite example of this is Taylor Swift. I can't carry a tune in a bucket. Okay. I'm honest. I can't do anything musical. My piano teacher when I was 12 told me to go back to playing softball, which of course I did. I just have no talent, but I love listening to music. But for some reason, every time a Taylor Swift song comes on, I can tell. And people are like, don't you find that song really catchy? Don't you just want to sing to it? I'm like, hey, it's grating on me. And I have friends who absolutely adore Taylor Swift who cannot stop listening to her. And I'm like, look, her first album, even her last album, is basically her taking my 13-year-old diary and singing it in song. I don't care. I don't care about who you broke up with. I don't care what Jake did. And so for me, and I because of that, I can't give her any sense of talent either. However, I have seen her do things for fans, for charity. I've seen her do really generous, amazing things. And so that makes her a good person for me. So is she socially attractive? As a person, yes, love her. As a musician, can't stand her. Sorry. I keep trying, but I acknowledge she's a really seemingly decent human being for the most part. Although if I could make a living out of talking about my exes, that would have been a lot easier than going to grad school, let me tell you. I think that there's probably a lot of people in the world who we, find attractive physically. And then when we find out that they're not very nice in real life, we're like, oh man, I hate that dude or that girl or that person, right? Probably one of the most disappointing things that I had ever heard from my brother. We're from Pittsburgh. We love Ben Roethlisberger, right? And yeah, he's made some mistakes. I'm not going to lie about that. I'm not going to excuse it. But over the past, 10, 12 years, he's been nothing but good to the people of Pittsburgh. That said, my brother took my nephew up there. And again, this was a while ago. And same nephew that's at Nebraska. And Ben is huge, tall, big man, very big man. And my nephew just really wanted to see him, just really wanted to maybe shake his hand or something. And I guess Ben was in a bad mood that day. And he was just like, I'm not talking to anybody. Just like walked away. And that was it. My family was against Ben forever. Not me, but a few of them because of one action. And for me, I'm like, dude, he could have just been having a bad day. These things happen. It's okay. Don't take it so personally. I don't think he was like, hey, Dude Ash is over there. I don't want to see you. There were literally thousands of people there, or hundreds of people there at least. So one bad act can take away your credibility very quickly. All right. And then what that does is that affects your social attractiveness. These are all sort of wrapped together. Credibility, I tend to think of more as reasoning, logic, argument, intelligence, competence in the subject area of which a person is trying to persuade me. Social attractiveness, aside from physical attractiveness, can also include power, in the sense that there could be somebody who's not very socially attractive, and then you see them speak with authority or some kind of power or charisma, and all of a sudden you're like, oh man, they are so cute. I'm pretty sure that's what happened with Bill Clinton, because he became president when I was a freshman in college. He was my first presidential election that I can vote in. And sure, I mean, I won't lie, I voted for him, but not because I thought he was attractive. There was nothing for me in him that was physically attractive, just nothing. But clearly some people did. They say that he won because soccer moms thought he was cute. Maybe the problem was I was a college freshman, not a soccer mom. I don't know, but I did not find him attractive. JFK, he's all right, I guess. Looking back, most of the pictures I have are in black and white. There's some in color. He's a good-looking dude, but I wasn't like fall over gorgeous for this guy. I don't understand where people got that. But when they got behind the podium to give a speech, or when they stood up in front of a crowd and began to speak, and they used that cadence and they used that authority, all of a sudden their attractiveness level goes up. Physical attractiveness. I had a college professor when I was in grad school at Mizzou. This is embarrassing because it's within the last 20 years, but I was bowled over by this guy, and he was in the English department, not the communication, so don't try to find it. He's also at a different university now. But I was just like, dude, this guy is so attractive. Everything he says is just liquid gold. I love him that much. He was amazing. I would sit in his classes like the Indiana Jones girl. If you ever saw the original Indiana Jones with the girl that writes "I love you" on her eyes and then closes her eyes every time that Harrison Ford looks at her. I was in love. Dude's ugly. Dude does not have any attractive quality. I mean, after I graduated and I got away from the university, and then I met up with him just for a coffee when I happened to be in Columbia, and he was still there, and I was like, what the heck did I see in this dude? But I still enjoyed my time with him. He's still very intelligent, clearly competent, and still had that cadence, a voice that made me feel comfortable, and an authority and a level of knowledge that was just, obviously still brilliant. So while he lost his physical attractiveness very quickly with me after that, I was still socially attracted to him, right? Like, social attractiveness can come from so many different things. If you've ever had a friend who said, boy, I really like that, fill in the blank, whoever it is, doesn't matter. And you're just like, what? There's more college professors that I was just like, why am I interested in this person? It is all about how they speak, how much credibility they bring with them, and therefore how much social attractiveness they have. And those three things are extremely powerful. You don't have to be physically attractive, but you must be socially attractive. You don't have to be charismatic, but you need to be able to have some level of authority. So everything's sort of on a scale, sort of. How do we measure that? Well, in COM 115, we tell you that you need to establish credibility. Well, I'm sorry, when I taught it, we did that. You have to establish credibility. We used to offer two ways of doing it. The first was to make sure your audience knows that you have goodwill towards them. So establish that you care about your audience, or that there is a reason that they will benefit from what they're about to hear. And the second is your competence. So this is where you need to explain that you did the research and that you have personal experience with the subject matter. That's how we put that into 115. Establish credibility. And then if you're poised and you're organized and you walk properly and you dress as if you're there to give a speech because you care about your audience, then you'll be in good shape. All of those things went into establishing credibility in COM 115. And I hope you all got that, because literally when I read these two chapters, I was like, oh, competence, character, yay, got it. But it's definitely more complex than that. And I think this book does a good job of breaking that down. I guess there is a perfect formula. If you are charismatic, good looking, socially attractive, powerful, have authority, and you're incredibly intelligent, if you've got all 6 of those, you're in. You probably could persuade anybody to do anything. There's only one person who meets that criteria for me, and that's Ricky Martin. Don't argue with me. Okay. No, I mean, there's a lot of people who sort of can meet most of those criteria for me, if not all. Zelensky may not be a very good looking man. I don't really know, because right now I'm blinded by my appreciation for his courage. The Prime Minister of Canada, I can't remember his name. He is probably not as attractive as I think he is, but I have a real sense of his power when he spoke to the G6 after Donald Trump basically said, I'm not dealing with this, I'm out. And the Prime Minister sort of stood up and said, we may be a friendly country, but that does not mean that we're always nice. And he was making a very clear statement. So his power there that he had, his authority. I think the long and the short of it is this. Persuasion, when it comes to competence and character, when it comes to credibility, when it comes to social attractiveness and charisma, it's difficult to pinpoint steps to get there or 1 or 2 things that make those things up. It's difficult to teach, but it's not something you're born with either. So how we measure that has not ever been really truly established. What has been established is what authority can do to greatly influence people to do things that they normally would not do. For example, the Milgram study, which is what we all go back to when we talk about the question of persuasion and coercion. So you'll read about this in your book, but I'm going to briefly explain it. This was, again, so long ago, I think it was before I was born. I believe it was at Yale. There was a researcher looking into the psychology of persuasion. And what he did was, his name was Milgram, Dr. Milgram, obviously. He set up an experiment. He had people who were in a room behind a door, and he had other people on the other side of that door. Usually it was one person and one person. And on this side of the door, with the people who were coming in, these are just your average everyday test subjects. When they would come in, there would be a person in a white coat, like a doctor, like a researcher, lab technician, who came over and told them what they were going to do. And so what they would then do is ask the person who was the test subject to listen to the answers to questions. And if the doctor in there with them told them that the question was answered incorrectly by the person behind the door, then they were to press a button that would send an electrical shock to that person. And it started out low, and then for every answer they got wrong, it went up and up and up and up. And these people hesitated. I mean, the test subjects hesitated whenever they were like getting higher and they heard the people behind the door screaming, "Oh my God, that hurts so bad. Oh, come on, stop," and the test subjects would want to stop, but the person who was standing there with them, the doctor or lab technician or the person of authority, would say, "Do it." And they would do it. The truth of the matter is that some people were very traumatized from being test subjects in this particular study, and I can see why. However, at the end, they were told that the people behind the door who were being electric shocked, weren't actually being hurt at all. They were just acting. Okay. So there's a lot of lying going on here, and a lot of trauma for some people who were like, why did I do this? Why did I keep hurting someone, even though they weren't? But they didn't know that. This is considered one of the preeminent studies. Was it an ethical study? I'll leave that to your judgment after you read the book, because our book talks about that. I have my opinion on that, but what did it tell us? It told us that persuasion that comes from authority will get people to do anything, including hurt somebody. Is that coercion or is that persuasion? It's a good question. So I'm going to leave you with that, and knowing that the Milgram study was very much just an authority telling someone to do something. That's it. I'm an authority and I'm telling you to do something. Everything else that is considered ethical that happens in our everyday lives requires a heck of a lot more than just simple authority. So here's what I need you to do. Now, spring break is coming up soon-ish. And I acknowledge that. What I want you to do, though, is I'm going to give you one of your assignments that get it into me before the last day of classes, not the last week of finals, but the last day of classes. So that will be a Thursday. It will be right before Dead Day. And I don't have that date in front of me. I want to say it's like May 14th or something like that. I would like you to do what in your syllabus I've labeled as the annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography is this. It is simply your demonstration and sharing of research and your explanation of that research. Here's how it works. I want you to find 2 external sources of information about persuasion. The more credibility it has, the better. So yeah, academic journals would be your best bets, or books that are written on persuasion, not textbooks. Textbooks are not an external source, because if you look at a textbook, it references all the external sources it's summarizing for you. Hint, hint, that's a great way to find sources. I'm just saying. So I want you to find two. And I want you to put on the discussion board the APA citation for that source, and then 2 paragraphs. One that summarizes what the article is about, and I don't mean write an abstract. I mean the summary. And then the second paragraph tells us why it's important for us in this class to know the information that you found in that source. And you're going to do this for 2 articles. Yeah, I'm asking for a total of 4 freaking paragraphs. Not bad, right? It's worth 200 points. So I want you to get quality sources. In addition, I would prefer that there not be any doubling up of the sources. So there's plenty out there. So what I would like you to do is, the first person that puts up whatever articles, just make sure that you're not matching with them or anybody else. So if you're the 15th person to put up articles, make sure that you're not double dipping, that you're not utilizing the same article that somebody else is using, or same book or whatnot. Okay? That's my requirement there. So what's the point of this exercise? First of all, it's for us as a class to build a database, basically, of persuasion resources that we can use if we want to look up, research, or study persuasion. The second thing that it's doing is it's letting me know that you're able to find research that is academic, primary in nature, and that you're able to read it and describe it to me. I don't expect you to understand everything that you're going to read, but I would hope that you wouldn't write about something you didn't understand. So if there's any questions about that, please let me know. Again, it is due the day before Dead Day, so the last day of classes, which is a Thursday. And I'll post that on the discussion board and get the date for you when I post the discussion board. And you can do it anytime between now and then. And when the earlier you do it, the earlier I'm going to grade it. I realize you're thinking, sure, right, you still haven't graded our quizzes, and you're right. But I'm still within my 2-week time period, so hang with me, okay? Those are going to be done soon. Also, that reminds me, one of you told me that one of the questions I had put in there actually had multiple answers. It was a multiple choice question, and somebody gave an answer that was probably correct, and it came up wrong. And I went back and looked at that question, and I was like, yeah, you're right. So that question, there's probably 3 out of 4 answers you could put that were right. And I imagine you did. So you'll probably get that one right if you got it wrong. I'm trying to think of which one it was. I think it was, what's the difference between coercion and persuasion? And I had put the power of choice was the right answer. But there were also answers that very clearly could have been the answer too. I don't know if I was just tired when I wrote that question, or if I was thinking just about what I thought. But I will definitely make sure that you get credit for that answer. All right, everybody, you have been bombarded with me today. Apologies for that, but hopefully you'll catch up on your reading if you haven't already, and hopefully I will, and we'll keep going through this. This book we're not going to run out of time to get through everything we need to get through for this class, so we're in good shape. I hope you're doing well. Stay healthy. If I don't see you before break, have a good break. Stay safe. Come back safely. All right, everybody. Talk to you soon.